There you go. Okay, we should be up and ready. Ezra, do I have the thumbs up?
Yep, you can go ahead.
Beautiful. So it's 5 o'clock here in Israel. I'm in Efrat, and we have people that are joining us. It's pretty exciting from all over the world, really. We have quite a number of people that have signed up for the course. Very, very excited about it. Let's jump right in. This course is going to start in a okay. We're going to start in a small town in eastern Poland by the name of Radzin. The year is 1889. Our hero is Rabbi Gershon Henoch Leiner. He's known affectionately as the Radziner Rebbe, Grand Master of a sect of Hasidim known as Radzin Hasidim. Rabbi Gershon Henoch is the grandson of the famous Mordechai Yosef Leiner.
Honey, do me a favor. Set the timer for 30 minutes.
I'm sorry?
You can mute everyone.
Okay. I'm going to do that. Just make sure that everybody is muted. Not quite sure how to do that. So everybody is just going to have to mute themselves. Okay. 1889. Rav Gershon Henoch Leiner. His grandfather, the Mordechai Yosef, is the famous Mei Shiloach, who was the principal student of the Kutzker Rebbe. Broke with the Kutzker Rebbe in 1839 to set up his own dynasty, his own Hasidic line from the town of Ishbitz, so he's known as the Ishbitzer Rebbe. Mordechai Yosef's son, Yaakov, was the author of the Beis Yaakov, and his son, Rav Gershon Henoch, moved a few miles away to the town of Radzin. By this time, the Radzin Hasidim numbered in the thousands, and Rav Gershon Henoch was known far and wide as a brilliant man. Ishbitz Hasidut had its own very, very special and beautiful style. And in the year 1889, the Radziner Rebbe, Rav Gershon Henoch, decides to pick himself up, leave his country, leave his town of Radzin, leave his thousands of followers of Hasidim, and leave his family, and take a trip to a far, far away place across the continent and to the very bottom tip of Italy, to the town of Naples. And there he went to search. What did he go to search for? He went to search for Tekhelet. And here is just something that Rav Gershon Henoch wrote. That's his seal on the right. There is an obligation upon all who are capable to search for Tekhelet to merit Israel with this commandment, which has been forgotten for the last several centuries. And he who succeeds in this will surely be blessed by God. That is Rav Gershon's mission, to go rediscover Tekhelet, reinstitute Tekhelet back to the Jewish people, because Tekhelet had been lost for many, many, many generations. In fact, almost 1,300, as we'll see soon, almost 1,300 years, this commandment, the commandment to wear Tekhelet on the talit of every Jew, had not been able to be fulfilled. It was lost. And we're going to follow Rav Gershon Henoch on his journey. And essentially, these words are our guiding words in this class. The obligation upon all who are capable to search for Tekhelet. So, a couple of logistic issues before we start. Some bookkeeping. In this course, we are going to try and answer the following questions. First, what is Tekhelet, and why should we care about it? Second, if we do decide that it is an important thing to care about, well, how could it possibly have been that Tekhelet was lost to the Jewish people? I can't imagine Jews losing the recipe for matzah or the exact fruit that an esrog is, or tefillin, for that matter. We can't imagine. This is such an important part of being Jewish. And if Tekhelet was indeed dear and important to the Jewish people, if it was a commandment that was being kept and that people felt was necessary and was required and wasn't important, how could it possibly have been lost to all of the Jewish people, to the entire Jewish world? It's almost mind-boggling, and we have to try to understand how that came about. Third, I'd like to ask the question, and we'll try to understand, why did it take so long to actually rediscover Tekhelet? You know, modern times have been around, the 19th century and the scientific revolution, and the 20th century certainly, with all of the advances in science and technology. And really, Tekhelet hasn't been around for more than 25, 30 years. So what was it that stopped us? What was the obstacle? What was in our way from actually finding Tekhelet? And all of these questions are really, really going to be important, because if we can't answer these questions, then we have some fundamental problems with the explanation that we're trying to give to Tekhelet. So we have to ask that question. We have to try to understand, why did it take so long to rediscover it? And last, what are the implications of the rediscovery of Tekhelet? And we'll try to understand that from many, many different aspects, including halacha, Jewish law, and so on. Okay, a little bit more bookkeeping. We're going to have 4 sessions. These 2 sessions, this and next week, will be by me. I think that we changed the clocks in Israel at the end of this week between Purim and Shushan Purim. But everybody should just kind of calibrate yourself according to 11 o'clock Eastern time. Whatever that means, that's when the class is going to be. This week, it's 5 o'clock here. Next week, I think it's 6 o'clock, but I'm not 100% sure, so everybody should just make sure where and how and what. The third session, we're going to take a trip to the Tekhelet factory, and we'll be there together with Joel Guberman, and he's going to show us a little bit he's going to show us around the factory, and he'll actually do the dyeing with us. But at that point, if anybody would like to join and do the dyeing by themselves in their house, it's optional, it's smelly, but it might be a lot of fun. So if you do want to do that, then you need to get yourself a dye kit, and we have that on the Tekhelet store. We call it Dye in a Box, and here's the URL, and it's posted again. I think it's under the 3rd lecture that you can find the link for how to order this. But I would suggest that you order it fairly soon, because it will take a little while to get to you. So if you do want to be ready for the 3rd session, then by all means, make sure that you do that. And last but not least, we're going to try to cover as much as we can in this course. We probably won't be able to cover the entire story, but you can look on our website, tekhelet.com, to find out more. And I'll try to be posting some links for further reading, in addition to maybe some preparatory resources if anybody wants to look at them beforehand. There's also an excellent resource, my book. My wife and I wrote a book. It's called The Rarest Blue, and I'll post the link to that. You can get that book either from our website, or you can get it from Amazon. And it's available both in English, The Rarest Blue, or in Hebrew, L'Tom HaShamayim. So that's another resource that you may want to do. We'll try to cover things that aren't in the book. We certainly won't cover everything that is in the book. But for those of you who have read the book, I hope that you'll find these courses, this lecture, interesting. So let's start back all the way at the beginning. Dyes in the ancient world. What did it mean to wear something? Because if we're going to try to understand what it was that Rav Gershon Henoch was looking for, then we have to understand what the significance was of some sort of a beautiful colored garment in ancient times. So in ancient times, dyes were very, very hard to find. We'll talk about the chemistry of dyeing, and we'll talk about the fact that the history of chemistry is essentially the search for dyes. That was what was important to people, and it's important because it was so difficult and rare. In ancient times, you did have some dyes, usually coming from different plant sources, and almost always they were in the red to brown region of colors. Saffron, different types of colors and dyes, from vegetables, from plants, from fruits, but essentially they're almost always in this kind of a earth tone setting. So when it became known that there was a way, a method of dyeing beautiful, beautiful purple and blue garments in a way that could be fast, that could stay on cloth, that wouldn't wash out and that wouldn't fade, well, this was a breakthrough. It was a breakthrough in fashion, certainly, because who wouldn't want such a thing? But more importantly, it was a breakthrough in economic, a fundamental commodity in the world of that time were these blue and purple dyes, and anybody who controlled the manufacture of these dyes, well, they could make tons and tons of money. So it became very, very precious, very desired. And that helps us to understand, really, in a sense, what Tekhelet was in its context. Now, Tekhelet is this beautiful dyed, we'll call it blue for now. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a few seconds. So let's look at what the Bible, what the Torah has to tell us about Tekhelet. The first time we meet Tekhelet in the Torah is in Parshat Truma, which talks about all of the different parts of precious items that were made in manufacturing the portable temple, the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And Moshe asks, or God tells Moshe to ask the Jewish people to bring all of that which was precious, zahav, gold, chesed, nechoshet, silver and bronze, and Tekhelet argaman, torat shani. These are the three principal colors, the most beautiful fabrics. Tekhelet, we'll call it again blue for now, argaman, the purple, and torat shani, the red, the crimson. Torat shani comes from a bug, Kermes beetle. Tekhelet and argaman, well, where do they come from? The Torah never tells us. So we're going to have to try and understand that. But we do see, at least from here, from the beginning, the first time Tekhelet is mentioned, it is in the list of the precious items that were used in the tabernacle, and it is the head of the list. If you look at the two lists here, you have the precious metals, zahav, v'chesef, u'nechoshet, gold, silver, and copper. The most beautiful of those, the most precious, is zahav, the first in the list. And on the list of beautiful linens and fabrics, Tekhelet argaman torat shani, and Tekhelet heads that list. So we can assume that Tekhelet was very, very precious, if not the most precious, of the linen and fabrics that existed. And in the tabernacle, not only as part of the walls and the coverings and the curtains of the tabernacle, but also as the priest's clothes. The high priest, the Kohen Gadol, he had beautiful clothes, a special array of bigadim, of adornments that he wore, and one of those, and they all actually had Tekhelet in them, the extra clothes that the Kohen wore. Vayaset ha'me'il, right? The me'il was a coat and a robe, and that robe was kulo Tekhelet. It was all Tekhelet. It was pure Tekhelet. Okay, so the tabernacle has Tekhelet. The Kohen, the high priest, has Tekhelet. The average everyday priest had a sash, a belt of Tekhelet. And what you see from here is that Tekhelet is found in connection with royalty, with priestly garments, with fabulously precious items. And essentially, this represents pretty much the way that the Jewish people look at holiness. It's if you were to abstract and say, you know, how do the Jewish people look at worldly beautiful items? Well, they don't deny the fact that there is there's a lot of value to beauty, to an aesthetic item, or to things that people consider precious. But rather, as opposed to using them to signify individual status or material wealth, what the Jews tried to do was to elevate and sanctify them, not to deny their value. And so when you have something as precious as Tekhelet, well, the natural thing for the Jew to do is to consecrate it and to sanctify it and to use it in the service of the true King, namely the King of Kings, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God. And so the Kohen Gadol, the highest priest, wears clothes that are all Tekhelet. The regular everyday priest wears a sash and a belt of Tekhelet. And every Jew who is also a priest, V'atem tiyuli mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, the Torah tells us, and you will be for me a kingdom of priests, a nation of priests, right, and a holy nation. So each and every Jew, as representation of his commitment to God and to his commitment to the King of the universe, the King of Kings, there is a commandment, and we read this in the Shema. So every Jew is commanded to wear this tassel on the corner of his garment. Every Jew is commanded to wear on those tzitzit, on the garment, one string of Tekhelet to remind him. You'll see that string of Tekhelet on the tzitzit, and you will remember it. Kol mitzvot Hashem. It's like a uniform. When you see somebody's uniform, a fireman, a policeman, a nurse, you know exactly what their function is. You know exactly what the goal is in the service that they perform. And so too, when you look at the high priest, when you look at the priest, and when you look at every Jew, when he would look at his strings on his garment, each and every Jew would remember what the purpose of what the real purpose is, and that, of course, is to serve God. Well, let's fast forward a few thousand years, and we get to what we'll read in this week on Purim from the Megillah, Mordechai yatzami lifnei hamelech b'levush malchut Tekhelet, which again shows that in Persia, royal garb was Tekhelet. And this is important because it tells us a number of things about Tekhelet. Remember, I told you that the Torah, the Bible, never tells us, in all of the 49 times that Tekhelet is mentioned throughout the Tanakh, never once does it tell us what exactly Tekhelet is, where it comes from, how it's made, and so on. So the reason for that is because it was obvious. It never tells us what gold is, and it never tells us what oil is. It just these are things that are obvious that everybody knew what they were. And so too Tekhelet. Anybody would have known who lived in that time what Tekhelet was. It's also important to note that we are talking about from the time when the Torah was given to the time of Persia in the very end of the Babylonian exile. So we're talking almost 1,000 years, right? And let's say geographically, we're looking at when the Jews came out of Egypt, when they were first commanded, when the first time Tekhelet appears, all the way across the world, pretty much, to Persia, close to 2,300 kilometers away. In all of that time, and in all of that space, Tekhelet was there. And the world knew about Tekhelet, people knew about Tekhelet, and Tekhelet was being used and was a desired and precious commodity. That's an important fact, because if we're going to look for Tekhelet because it was lost, well, we're going to have to find something that was used throughout the world, certainly throughout the Western world, we'll call it, from Persia all the way to Egypt and Greece and Rome. And it had to be something that was available, was a real thing, and we have to keep that in mind. I want to point out a medrash from on this pasuk, on this sentence. The medrash says, we'll read it together. Mordechai yatsa milifnei hamelech b'levush malchut Tekhelet, right, on the bottom of this slide. Rabbi Pinchas Omer, Malach Mordechai al HaYehudim. Rabbi Pinchas said that Mordechai was the king of the Jews. Right? Yatzami lifnei hamelech b'levush malchut. The royal garb Royal to who? Royal, says the Medrash, to the Jews. He was the king of the Jews. Ma melech lovesh purfurim, kach Mordechai lovesh purfurim. Just like the melech, the king, meaning the king of the non-Jews, wears his porphyros, or purple, that's a Greek word, so too Mordechai, who was the king of the Jews, wore his purple clothes. And that leads me to the question, what exactly does the word purple mean? And it's going to be a hard question to answer because what purple meant in ancient times is not the same thing that it means today. So I'm going to quote from Philip Ball in his Bright Earth, which is a wonderful book about colors. Purple is a fluid chromatic concept in antiquity. And the ancient dye ranged in color from bluish to a deep red, depending on how it was prepared. So purple was a range of colors. It's not what we today call purple, but rather it was a whole class of colors that went on the spectrum from red almost all the way to blue. And of course, what we call today purple in between. And purple really meant the dye that comes from the purple snail. And so purple is mixed up with a lot of different things are convoluted here. Purple means the purple snails or the purple source of the dye, right? They were called porphyra or porphyros. And today, some snails are still in Greece called porphyros. If you're looking for the snails that we actually use for Tekhelet, they're still to this day called porphyros in Greece. So purple meant the snails. Purple meant the dyers, the people who did the dyeing of purple, and purple meant the resulting dye that came from these shellfish dyes. And all of the colors and all of the range in the spectrum in between. And just a few points that you can see that point that out, even from our own literature. Okay, so this is the Yerushalmi, the Rav Yah actually quoting the Yerushalmi, where the Talmud talks about differentiating when do you know it's early enough in the morning, or I should say late enough in the morning, it's light enough to be able to say Shema in the morning. The Talmud says when you can tell the difference between Tekhelet and Karti, between a blue color, Tekhelet, and between a green color. So if it's light enough, if the sun has come up enough, that you can make that determination, that actually difficult determination, you have to be quite sensitive to be able to to distinguish between, let's say, dark blue and dark green. And so the Yerushalmi says, "Vein Tekhelet lekarti, vein porphyri or vein porphina," between Tekhelet, porphyri. And again, so what I wanted to point out here is that the Medrash itself is telling you or translating the word Tekhelet as porphyro, as purple. And one more example of this is the Or Tachash Milamata v'Tekhelet Milamala. These are the coverings of the Aron, of the Holy Ark. Why? Why do we cover the Ark with Tekhelet, with this beautiful covering? Shekein Darkan Shel Melachim Porphyra Shelahen Tekhelet. Again, associating the word Tekhelet with the word the Greek word porphyra or purple. And that's actually going to be something I think that'll help us. So hopefully a little bit. If I do want to use purple in the antiquity sense, what we call purple, you know, that kind of mix of blue and red, I'll try to use the word argaman, because I think that that actually represents something which is closer to what we call purple. Tekhelet, what color is Tekhelet? Well, that's something that we're going to have to talk about. I keep on saying that it's blue, but I'm going to have to prove that to you. Okay, so what do we know from the Bible about where Tekhelet came from? Again, I mentioned that there is never really an indication that a specific source is identified as the particular source of Tekhelet, but we do get a little bit of a sense. Okay, now the Tosefta, which is later than the Bible, of course, tells us that Tekhelet eina kshira ela min achilazon. There is this chilazon, the source, the animal source of the Tekhelet, and that is the only thing which is suitable, permissible for ritual Tekhelet. If somebody brought Tekhelet that did not come from a chilazon, it would be inadmissible both for the for use in the temple and, of course, for use on the tzitzit. So we know it has to come from a chilazon. Doesn't really help us because the Talmud doesn't tell us exactly what a chilazon is. It gives us some hints, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. But we can get some hints, actually, from the Bible itself. So, a pasuk in Yechezkel, that Tekhelet comes from Iye Elisha. These are the islands of Elisha, which are identified either with the Greek islands, perhaps Cyprus, perhaps Crete. So some of the islands in the Mediterranean, and Yechezkel tells us that that is a place where Tekhelet is being produced. By Yishlach Shlomo, another pasuk that gives us a little bit of a hint, is that when Shlomo wanted to build the temple and was looking for somebody to help him with Tekhelet, he went to his friend and neighbor to the north, Hiram, the king of Tsor, the king of Tyre, which is the capital city of the region of Phoenicia. And from there, he was able to get somebody who knew how to work with Tekhelet. So now we know that Tekhelet was also manufactured, and maybe even the principal place where it was used and manufactured was in Tsor, to the north of Israel, along the coast. The Gemara tells us that the tzayadei chilazon, those who were catching, their job was to catch the chilazon, misulamot shel Tsor v'yad Haifa. And this is, of course, much later than Solomon, 1,000 or so years later. But still, when Tekhelet was being produced, if you wanted a chilazon, where would you look for it? Well, along the northern coast, from Haifa and all the way north up until Tsor, which is in Lebanon, southern Lebanon. Okay, there's even a Braita which gives us another indication of where Tekhelet was made, and that was in the city of Luz. And Luz is identified with a city in southern Turkey. Okay, so what's the picture that you get here? And even the Rambam, and of course the Rambam is much, much later, and the Rambam, we'll see, didn't have Tekhelet, but he had quite an extensive tradition as to what Tekhelet was. And he tells us that this chilazon was in the Yam HaMelech. The Yam HaMelech to the Rambam means the salty sea. He doesn't mean what we call the Yam HaMelech today. He doesn't mean the Dead Sea. He means the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, so all of these lead us to the fact that Tekhelet, or the chilazon, is found in the Mediterranean, and that the production of Tekhelet happened really all along the Mediterranean area, all along the Mediterranean basin. We're going to find, at least according to the Bible, that this is where Tekhelet came from. Well, that helps us, certainly. So we now know, and things starting to make sense a little bit. What I mentioned before, that this seashell that was called purple in ancient times, what we call today the murex, and maybe I'll just quote one of the ancient naturalists or scientists, and this is Vitruvius, a great scientist or naturalist that lived around the time of Herod. I shall now begin, he says, to speak of purple. Okay, it was enough. It was important enough. It was certainly important enough that the naturalists of those days would want to talk about it. And of course, purple exceeds all the colors that have so far been mentioned, both in costliness and its superiority of its delightful effect. Okay, it was very, very beautiful, very, very costly, very precious. It is obtained from a marine shellfish, and that's really the most important thing that I wanted to point out. So, in the time of the Second Temple, we're starting to get a picture that purple, which we're associating with Tekhelet, comes from a marine shellfish. And that shellfish, we believe today, is the murex. Well, okay. Tekhelet is a very, very, very precious and beautiful commodity. It's something which is essential for one of the most important mitzvot, Gadol mitzvot tzitzit, sheshkura keneged kol mitzvot shebetorah. That's a Gemara that says, the Talmud says that the mitzvah of tzitzit and Tekhelet, of course, is equal to all of the other mitzvahs in the Torah put together, all the other commandments put together. Okay, even if that's hyperbole, that's still something that we that we need to take seriously, a very, very, very important and beautiful mitzvah. Well, if that's the case, how could it possibly have been that Tekhelet was lost? And I think that it's Tekhelet's phenomenal success that led, to a certain extent, to its downfall. Because it was so expensive, everybody wanted it. But when everybody wants something and it's desired, well, usually those who have the capability, whether that's economically or militarily or by any other means, they are going to try and take over, in a sense, a monopoly on that precious commodity. I think that's true today, and it was probably and certainly true in those days as well. And so the Roman emperors began to put restrictions on the use and on the manufacture. They wanted, the royal dye houses, they wanted to manufacture Tekhelet and Argaman, the purples, and they wanted the money. They wanted the profits from that. But not only the profit, that was certainly true in the earlier days, but they also wanted that no one else should be able to wear or even own these beautiful and highly desired fabrics. They became associated with the most elite and with the royal family. And so anybody who wore them or even owned them, well, as Theodosia says, it's a crime similar to high treason. And we don't have to, it doesn't leave much to the imagination in terms of what the punishment for high treason is and what the punishment is for owning the purples. And I'll talk now about the Codex of Justinian the Emperor, which you see on the bottom. Justinian, maybe two words about Justinian. Justinian came to power. He was not young. He had already a very excellent career, a military career as a general. And when he came to power, he married a lovely lady, Theodora, who was 20 years his junior and not particularly from a high class, shall we say, background. Early on in his career, Justinian faced a crisis. He and Theodora were attending I guess you'd call it kind of a contemporary soccer match at the Hippodrome in Byzantium in Constantinople. I guess it wasn't really a soccer match, probably chariot races. And the two teams started to get a little bit unruly. The fans of the teams started to riot. These are called the famous Nika riots. And ironically, it was between the two fans, the two teams, the Greens and the Blues. In any event, the riot kind of got a little bit out of hand, and both teams turned on Justinian and Theodora and started stoning them. Well, Justinian grabbed Theodora and started running away, and he thought that that was the end. He said to Theodora, "We have to run away because if not, they are going to kill us." Theodora said to him, "No way. I didn't come all this way to be queen just to run away now and live out the rest of my life as some peasant. I am staying here." She said, "You can do whatever you want, but I'm staying here." And she famously said these words, Royal purple is the noblest of shrouds." In other words, she said, if I'm going to die a queen, and I will be buried in royal purple. Those words really changed Justinian's heart, and he faced down the crowd and continued on to have a wonderful, long, and illustrious reign as the Emperor of Byzantium, many, many military conquests, and all due to his lovely and persuasive wife, who convinced him that running away was not the best option. She wanted her royal purple, and she was going to have it. One of the things that Justinian did throughout his career was he basically he collated all of previous Roman law and set it up as one system. It's called the Codex Justinianus, and it was for the next 1,000 years the greatest example of Roman law that was studied and implemented throughout the empire and throughout the world, really. And here we have one of those pieces of his codex where he talks about what cannot be sold and people who are forbidden to sell or buy. And this is a very, very important piece here. Maybe it actually was because Theodora was so fond of beautiful purple gowns that he put this in. But the bottom line is, no private citizen shall have the right to dye or sell purple cloth. And very, very important, he goes on. Or hyacinthine, right? Hyacinth is blue. The word hyacinth is the Latin word for Tekhelet, and it is the same word that is used in the Targum HaShavim in the Septuagint, in the Latin translation of the Bible. Whenever Tekhelet is mentioned, the Latin word, the Roman phrase is hyacinth. So here, Justinian is coming out specifically and saying, no one is allowed to wear purple, no one is allowed to wear Tekhelet, no one's allowed to wear argaman or Tekhelet, no one's allowed to own it. And if somebody should own this or sell it, he risks losing his property and his life. Okay, so what we've seen here is that people who are dealing in Tekhelet, are risking their very, very lives. And we see this really in a beautiful way, and in a very direct way, from a story in the Talmud. Shalchulei, the Rava lives in Babylonia, of course, and he does not have access to Tekhelet. The manufacture of Tekhelet was in Israel, in Eretz Yisrael at the time, because that's where they could have access to the sea and to the Chilazon, to the source of Tekhelet. So if anyone in Babylonia wanted to get Tekhelet, it had to be smuggled out of Israel, and that was done by this pair of students who left Reket, which is Tiberia, and were on their way to Rava in Babylonia, in Babel, to bring Tekhelet. The Tafsu Nesher, they were caught by an eagle. In their hands was Tekhelet, things that were made in Rus, as I mentioned before, and Tekhelet was being smuggled. They were caught by the Nesher, and of course the eagle really is a representation for Rome. So the Romans caught them, the custom officials, perhaps. Somehow or another they were caught. Luckily they escaped, but maybe not everybody who was smuggling Tekhelet was going to escape. But what we see from here is that Tekhelet was very, very dangerous. People who were working in Tekhelet had to really, literally take their lives in their hands. And the picture that I have here is of a coin. This is a Roman coin, and it shows the eagle of Rome, and between the talons of the eagle, you see a murex snail. This is really almost as if this coin was minted to go along with the story in the Gemara. So, in the times of the Talmud, Tekhelet was not worn by everybody. The Talmud tells us, Gadol onsho shel lavan me'onsho shel Tekhelet. It's a lot worse if you don't wear white on your tzitzit than if you don't wear Tekhelet on your tzitzit. Why? Well, for many reasons. Tekhelet was very, very expensive in the impoverished community within Israel in the 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. Very, very difficult for them to come up with the money for Tekhelet. Tekhelet was rare. It was hard to find because the people who were making and manufacturing it were the royal dye houses. So it was not easy to obtain Tekhelet even if you had the money to get it. And most importantly, it was very, very dangerous. Who could take their lives into their hands and own Tekhelet and wear Tekhelet certainly in public when that was a crime punishable by death? So if that's the case, when exactly was Tekhelet lost? Well, the last time that we ever hear of Tekhelet was in the 6th century in the Gemara in Menachot. It talks about a certain Mar Mimashchi, a certain Mar from the town of Mashchi, and he used to make Tekhelet. Okay. By the 7th century, and the Medrash Tanchuma, we already have a different story. The Achshav ein lanu ela lavan she'Tekhelet nignaz. We no longer have Tekhelet. Tekhelet has been hidden, and all we have left is white. What happened between the 6th and 7th century? Well, Rav Herzog, who wrote a doctorate on Tekhelet, and we'll talk about him, his assumption is that the event that really put an end to Tekhelet, although we have seen that Tekhelet was very, very rare and wasn't being used by most people, but still it was available. But the Arab conquest, Caliph Umar in 637, and the conquest of Jerusalem, probably, at least according to Rav Herzog, was the death knell of Tekhelet in Israel and eventually in the entire Western world. When the Arabs came into these areas that were, sorry, hold on, make sure that I don't run out of battery. We'll figure out how to do this. Hold on one second. This is going to be important. I don't want to lose my battery. Do I have battery? There we go. Okay, I'm back. Caliph Umar, 637, and the demise of Tekhelet. When the Arabs and their conquest of all Roman areas, well, the first thing that they wanted to do was to essentially destroy anything that had to do with their sworn enemy, with the Romans. Certainly anything that had to do with funding the war effort of the Romans. So the Tekhelet and Argaman, the purple dye factories, were a source of great income to the Roman Empire. Those would have been absolutely the first who would have been the first things that would have been destroyed by the Arabs, and so they were, all along the coast, from Palestine, from Israel, all the way up the coast, up until the Arabs eventually took over Constantinople, and everywhere they went, they destroyed the dye factories, and so Tekhelet was lost. Tekhelet was lost to the Jewish people. Tekhelet was lost to the Roman Empire. Tekhelet was lost to the entire world. Nobody remembered, nobody knew what the source of Tekhelet, what the source of Argaman, what the source of these purple dyes were. Not Jews, not secular scholars, nobody. Okay, so Tekhelet was lost, but let's get back, if we can, to Rav Gershon Henoch. I have a few more minutes. So, if you wanted to find Tekhelet again, well, what would you do? How would you look for it? Well, we have a few hints from the Talmud. As we said, you're looking for a chilazon. Tekhelet is only kasher if it comes from a chilazon. If we can find the chilazon, good chance we'll find Tekhelet. What is this chilazon? Well, we know that it's some kind of a creature. Godel, as it grows, the Gemara says, so too does its shell or its exoskeleton. Nartik gadel imo. Another thing we know about the chilazon, this is a very, very interesting and important tosefta. Chilazon ze gufo domer liyam. Its body is similar to the sea. Uvriato domer ledag, and its creation is similar to that of a fish. Ve'oleh achat b'shivim shana. And it comes up once every 70 years. What do we know about that? What is going on there? Well, that's something that we're going to have to try and understand. But armed with this, the Radziner Rebbe went out to look for Tekhelet. And here's an important point, because when the Rambam, Maimonides, talks about Tekhelet, as I mentioned, the Rambam didn't have Tekhelet. He tries to explain what are the minimum criteria for kosher Tekhelet. And here's what he says. Tekhelet is blue. Demut harakia hanir'et le'ein hashemesh b'toaro shel rakia. And he doesn't leave anything to the imagination. He's talking about the blue sky in the middle of the day next to the sun. That's the shade that he's looking for. That is Tekhelet. And Tekhelet comes from a dye, and that dye is tzviya she'omedet biyofya v'lo tishtaneh. So the main characteristics are, let's say, that it comes from a sea creature, that it has the proper shade of blue, sky blue, and that it never fades. So that's what the Radziner Rebbe, that's what we're looking for if we can go out and look for Tekhelet. Well, the Rebbe started out in Radzin, and he went on his little trip all the way down to the bottom of Italy. This is a trip of, I think I tried to map it out on Waze. and I think it was something like 1,500 kilometers or something like that. And he did not do that. The Radziner Rebbe didn't do that by car, obviously, or by he probably did it by carriage. He set out together with his son Mordechai and his shamish, his butler. The three of them left behind everything that the Rebbe knew and spent close to a year on this journey. Why Naples? Why did he go to Naples? Well, there had just been opened in 1889 the first public aquarium, and that's where the Rebbe wanted to go. The Rebbe knew that Tekhelet was from some creature that was found in the Mediterranean, so he was looking in the Mediterranean. I'll read to you just, it's so beautiful and quaint, really, his description of what he found when he got to the Naples Aquarium. And there, he said, are rows of new buildings built of clear glass, and the seawater is constantly flowing, and there, all the creatures of the sea move about freely, and all is exposed and visible behind the glass walls. And there one can observe every animal, its conduct, eating habits, and all the details of its behavior. So the Rebbe is looking in this aquarium. Anybody would have just been amazed. Imagine the first time somebody sees an aquarium. And no one in the world had seen these before. But imagine certainly somebody coming from the middle of Poland and looking at all of these crazy creatures that they're running around in an aquarium underwater in their own natural habitat. The Rebbe found a creature that he believed was the chilazon. Why didn't he find the snail? That's something that we'll talk about in the next session. But what did he find? Well, he found a cuttlefish. This is a type of squid. I hope that you'll be able to see this lovely video running, because it really is a most amazing creature. This squid, the sepia, is also known as the inkfish, the tincta fish. And for any of you who know your colors, you know sepia is a brown color, and it comes from this fish, the Sepia officinalis. And so the dye that this squid or cuttlefish spritzes out when it is in danger, the Rebbe felt that dye would be able to be used for Tekhelet. Now, brown, of course, is not blue, but no problem. The Rebbe was able to fix that. The Rebbe was able to come up with a chemical equation and method, a process for taking the ink from the sepia, from the cuttlefish, and turning it blue. And he went back to Razin. By 1991, tens of thousands of his Hasidim were wearing Tekhelet. What did the rest of the world think about Rav Gershon Henoch's Tekhelet? Well, it wasn't really accepted by most people who were not Radzin Hasidim. Partially for political reasons. Remember, the Radzin Hasidim were not particularly accepted by other Hasidim because the grandfather, the Meshiloach, broke with Kutsk. So anybody who followed Kutsk was a mortal enemy of Ishbitz and Radzin. But really not only for those reasons. It wasn't just political, and it wasn't only for because people were afraid of change. There were actually some legitimate arguments that people had against the Rebbe's Tekhelet. I'll just bring down two of those. One of them is from somebody named Hillel Meshel Geldstein, who wrote a whole book called Psil Tekhelet, Psil Pei Samech Yud Lamed, if anybody gets the pun. Psil, the way you would say it in Ashkenazit, is also the string, Ptil Tekhelet, but it's also Psul, and with a little bit of an Eastern European accent, Psil. So that's the unacceptable, the Pasul, the Tekhelet, which is not something that can be used. Mishum, and here, Rav Hillel Meshel says something interesting. He says that one of the criteria that we have seen for Tekhelet is that omedet b'yofya v'lo tishaneh. The Rambam said that it never changes, it never fades. But nonetheless, he says, Kimo shera'u einai v'od shlosha rabbanim po ira kodesh tikonein v'techonein tibane b'mhera b'yameinu amen. He is talking in the late 1800s in Yerushalayim, in the old city of Jerusalem, where he is writing against the Tekhelet that came from Ravin, and he says that my eyes have witnessed it changing. It fades. It washes out. How could this be real Tekhelet? So that is a legitimate objection to Radin Tekhelet, and to this day, Radin Tekhelet actually does fade and does wash out, and that is a problem. It's a problem that the Rebbe addresses, but nonetheless, it's a problem. And then there's another essay that came out called Tekhelet Me'iyeh Elisha by Rav Mordechai Rabinovitz, and this is again a contemporary of the Radiner, and he says there's another problem, another issue that the Rebbe seems to not be addressing, and that is the fact that the Gemara Talmud, which we haven't spoken about, talks about the fact that the Tekhelet has to come from a live animal, from the chilazon when it's alive, because if not, then the dye just doesn't work. This is not a halachic issue, it's a technical issue. The dye is only clear and beautiful and lustrous if it comes from the chilazon when it's alive. This already the Gemara speaks about, and by the way, Pliny agrees with it and talks about it as well. Pliny, the ancient naturalist, the scientist, who talks about the dye methods, and we'll talk about that next week. So says Mordechai Rabinovitz, he says, well, if that's the case, how exactly did the sepia get back from Naples to Radin? Obviously, it was in the Rebbe's suitcase, and they weren't going to be able to be alive. So the process that the Rebbe had for making Tekhelet came from these dead cuttlefish, and that seems to go against the Gemara. So, for that reason, the Rebbe never really extended the use of the Tekhelet beyond his immediate disciples. And it was a very, very hotly contended topic all over Europe. People, even to this day, who can remember back before the war, can remember that there were these arguments and these things. Okay. We're going to leave our story at that point. I know it's going to be very, very difficult for you to make it through the week because we really haven't answered the questions. All we've done is just raised a lot of questions. What happened to that Tekhelet? What was about the Rebbe's Tekhelet? Why wasn't it accepted? Is there anybody who had any other thoughts about it? Well, actually, these are going to be questions that we're going to deal with next week. And again, I hate to leave you hanging, but that's the way it's going to be. People waited 1,300 years to get Tekhelet back. They'll have to wait another week until we continue our story. But I'd like to take just a few seconds before we end, and I want to tell you a little bit about my story and how I got involved in this. And it started back on a wintry day in 1991. My friend, Joel Guberman, let's see if I can see Joel. Which is Joel? Here's Joel. There's Joel. Called us up because he had met a wonderful rabbi, Eliyahu Tevger. Rav Eliyahu Tevger felt that he had found the source of the Tekhelet Achilazon, and he actually made one string of Tekhelet. This is in 1991. Well, Joel said, we have to get Tekhelet as well. I need Tekhelet as well. And Rabbi Tevger said to him, he can't because it's very, very hard to find these snails. It's very hard for me to find them, and you need quite a lot of them in order to make Tekhelet. So Joel said, well, I know some guys who know how to scuba dive. Maybe they'll be interested in helping out. Rabbi Tevger said, if you can find scuba divers, that would be excellent. And so I think this is me and my good friend Ari Greenspan. The four of us joined together and went up with a few other people. And we went up to the beach in northern Israel, first in Akko and then in Achziv. And we found 273 snails that day. But more than finding snails, the four of us, Joel, Rabbi Eliyahu, myself, and Ari, we found our calling in life, and I hate to be melodramatic, but it really is that. It became something of a curiosity to think about this and the idea of finding Tekhelet for the Jewish people. It went from a curiosity into a hobby, very quickly from a hobby into an obsession, and I would say from an obsession, it turned into a mission. We established the Biblical Tekhelet Association, a non-profit organization, and we started making Tekhelet. And that day on the beach, we basically committed our lives to bringing back Tekhelet to anybody in Am Yisrael, anybody in the Jewish people, anybody in the world who wanted to wear Tekhelet. After 1,300 years, we felt that the time had come, and it was our it fell to us, to our lot, to be involved in this wonderful, wonderful, beautiful mitzvah. And, you know, I want to share with you a word, a Dvar Torah, a bit of a spiritual idea that the Radziner had. You know, and I think that it actually is quite appropriate to talk about that in terms of this story and our story. The Radziner Rebbe said that Tekhelet is a kind of it reminds us, right? It reminds us of God. It reminds us of God. It's like a compass. It points the way to God. It tells us the direction that we should be heading in. But says the Radziner, you know, a compass is really only important if you've lost your way. If you're not quite sure which path to take, well, then compass is very, very important. Then you need to remember and to know what direction to take. Well, when you're lost, why would you be lost? Well, says the Radziner, the greatest enemy of spirituality, of a true relationship with God, is stagnation, is boredom, is rote and habit. If you're going to have a relationship with God, you have to be constantly moving closer to Him, because if you're not moving closer to Him, then you're moving farther away from Him. But to move, well, that entails risk. To do something new, to try to experience something new, to try to learn something new, to try to act in a different way, that's not something that comes easily. To break with your old habits, to try to improve your relationship with God, and to try to increase your level of spirituality, that's something that requires risks. And it means that you have to leave your comfort zone. It means you have to learn something different. It means you maybe have to act a little bit differently than you've learned. Well, says the Radziner, you know your clothes, right? That's your comfort zone. There's nothing that's more you, protects you, right? It's where you are. It's where you're comfortable. It's where you're nice and cozy and safe. But that's not where the tzitzit are. You have to break beyond that. You have to do more. You have to break your boundaries. You have to go beyond what you've done. Today, you're a different person than you were yesterday. And so your relationship with God has to be different. You have to go beyond the edge of yourself and out into the unknown, like the tzitzit, right? Just like the tzitzit come from the edge of a person's cloth, from the very, very end of his garment, the tzitzit push you out. If you're going to find God, you're not going to find God inside. You're going to find God in the newer places, in the places where you've never been before. But that entails risk, and if it entails risk, maybe I won't get there. Maybe I'll fall. Maybe I'll fail. Says the Radziner, well, that's what the Tekhelet comes to tell you. God says, I will be there with you to help guide you through and to help you find safe haven where you will be one step closer to me. And I think that that was kind of what we felt, that calling to do something that hadn't been done in 1,300 years. That was really something that we felt was something that we needed to do, something that we felt would be a worthwhile endeavor. Certainly difficult, certainly full of unknowns, certainly full of risk of failure. But ironically, or maybe not so ironically, and maybe not even coincidentally, that was the journey that we took in order to, on our own personal lives, and a journey that we hope very, very much has been something that has added to the ability of Jews around the world and people around the world to come a little bit closer to God. With God's help, Tekhelet tells you, even an impossible dream can be realized. I think that's about it for today. We're going to wrap it up here. And I hope we probably have some questions. I'm going to stay on a few minutes longer and try to answer some questions. If anybody wants to, find out any more things, you're welcome to email me. You have my email. not now. If not now, then later. If anybody is listening to this archived, by all means, any kinds of questions, any comments, any feedback, would be wonderful to hear from you, and I'll do my best and try to answer everyone. I don't think that we really have. Well, maybe we do. I'm not perfectly. Okay. You know what? One sentence that here someone asks, what about the ecological collapse of the Murex? You know what? I'm going to address that. I'll probably address it in the third lecture together with Joel when we talk a little bit more about how we catch the Murex, and we'll show you a little bit about that. It's a great question. If I don't get to it in the third session, please remind me. It's a great question. It's an important question and something that we worry about. We want to make sure that Tekhelet doesn't get lost for another 1,300 years. So we have to be very, very conscious about and responsible with how we use this beautiful resource that God has given us. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop recording. See you all next week. Remember, figure out how it works with the time. I think that we in Israel changed the clocks again, but just make sure, everybody. Thanks again.